The jungle was alive with its usual symphony of sounds. Leaves rustled with the passing breeze. Birds called to one another in melodic trills, and far off the growls and grunts of animals echoed faintly, warning of territorial disputes or hunts underway. But amidst this vibrant chaos, a tiger moved stealthily. Its sleek, muscular body blended seamlessly into the dappled shadows cast by the dense foliage. The tiger was in its element, the very embodiment of stealth and power, its sharp senses attuned to every rustle, every scent, every movement. Today the tiger wasn't idly roaming. It was on the hunt. Its sharp eyes scanned for the slightest flicker of movement, a deer, a wild boar, or even a smaller prey like a hare. Hunger gnawed at its stomach, sharpening its focus. Each step was calculated, each breath controlled. It was a master of patience, a predator that could wait hours for the perfect opportunity to strike. Suddenly, its ears twitched. A sound, distant but distinct, broke through the usual cacophony. It wasn't the rustle of prey or the cry of a bird. It was something foreign. The tiger froze, its body tense. The sound came again, a sharp, high-pitched wail that sent vibrations through the humid air. The tiger tilted its head, its piercing eyes narrowing in curiosity and confusion. This was not a sound of the jungle. Guided by its instincts, the tiger began to move towards the source. Its pace quickened as the wail grew louder. Soon, it approached a small clearing where the ground was carpeted with dry leaves and twigs. There, lying on the forest floor, was something the tiger had never encountered before, a tiny human baby. The child, no more than a month old, was wrapped in a crumpled cloth, its tiny arms flailing as it screamed. The tiger, a creature built for survival and predation, paused, its head lowering to examine this strange creature. Its powerful nostrils flared as it took in the baby's scent. Unlike the musky odor of prey, the baby smelled of vulnerability, innocence, and something distinctly human. For a moment the tiger remained motionless, its golden eyes fixed on the tiny figure. The baby's cries echoed louder, reverberating through the clearing and drawing the attention of birds perched on nearby branches. A flock of sparrows burst into the air, startled by the sound. The tiger's tail twitched as it tried to make sense of what lay before it. Ordinarily, a tiger would have moved on. This was not prey, not something that could satisfy its hunger. Yet something about the helplessness of the child struck a chord deep within the tiger's primal instincts. It wasn't just curiosity, it was a peculiar sense of protectiveness. The tiger circled the baby, its massive paws barely making a sound on the forest floor. From time to time it paused to sniff the child, its whiskers brushing against the soft skin of the baby's cheeks. The baby let out another sharp cry, and the tiger pulled back, as if startled. But rather than retreating into the jungle, the tiger sat back on its haunches, observing the baby intently. Unbeknownst to the tiger, this child was the victim of a cruel twist of fate. Hours earlier, the baby's parents, John and Lena, had been trekking through the jungle, their baby cradled in a sling on Lena's back. They had been cautious, sticking to well-worn paths and keeping their voices low. But the jungle is unpredictable, and danger can appear without warning. As they made their way through a narrow trail, a pack of wild wolves emerged from the underbrush. The wolves, hungry and territorial, let out guttural growls, their yellow eyes fixed on the family. John and Lena panicked. Gripping each other's hands, they ran as fast as they could, the wolves snapping at their heels. In their haste, they didn't notice when the sling carrying the baby slipped. The child fell to the ground with a soft thud, his cries muffled by the fabric. The wolves, focused on their adult prey, paid no attention to the tiny figure. By the time John and Lena realized their child was missing, they were far from the spot where he had fallen. As the tiger sat in the clearing, the baby's cries began to soften. Whether it was exhaustion or some unspoken connection with the tiger, the child grew quieter, its tiny chest rising and falling with steady breaths. The tiger leaned closer, its warm breath ruffling the baby's blanket. A strange thought seemed to stir in the tiger's mind. This creature, so small and fragile, could not have come here on its own. It must belong to others of its kind, creatures the tiger had occasionally glimpsed from afar, walking upright and making strange noises. If the baby had been abandoned, surely its parents would be nearby. The tiger made a decision, one that defied every law of nature. It gently lowered its head, using its powerful jaws to pick up the baby by the blanket. Careful not to harm the child, the tiger began to walk, its movement slow and deliberate. As it carried the baby through the jungle, the tiger's keen senses remained on high alert. The cries of other predators echoed in the distance, but the tiger's imposing presence kept them at bay. It moved with purpose, driven by an instinct that no one could explain, but that would soon become the stuff of legend. The tiger walked cautiously through the dense jungle, the baby securely held in its mouth by the edges of the blanket. It moved with an uncharacteristic gentleness, its steps deliberate as it ensured the infant was not jostled. The jungle was alive with its usual sounds, chirping insects, rustling leaves, and the occasional calls of nocturnal birds, but there was also an eerie tension in the air. Every predator's instinct in the tiger was on high alert as it carried its unusual burden. The baby stirred occasionally, its tiny cries muffled, but the tiger adjusted each time, ensuring it didn't harm the child. What drove the tiger to act this way was beyond comprehension. Perhaps it was the innocence of the baby, so unlike anything the tiger had ever encountered. Or perhaps it was a deeper, primal connection to life itself, something buried within the fabric of nature. The tiger stopped briefly near a small stream. It lowered the baby carefully onto a patch of mossy ground and sniffed the air. The scent of water mingled with the damp earth, but there were also faint traces of human scent, sweat, cloth, and smoke, though they were distant. The tiger seemed to hesitate, unsure of the direction to take. It took a few laps of water from the stream and then turned its attention back to the baby. Meanwhile, the baby's parents, John and Lena, were frantic. They had managed to escape the wolves but were now in a living nightmare, realizing their child was no longer with them. Lena's face was pale with fear, her voice hoarse from calling out the baby's name. John tried to retrace their steps, his heart pounding as he scanned the ground for any sign of their child. They called for help, but the jungle was vast and unyielding, a labyrinth that swallowed sound and hope. The tiger picked up the baby again and resumed its journey, this time moving more quickly. Its sharp eyes scanned for any sign of humans. The jungle was not a forgiving place, and every movement carried the risk of danger. As the tiger moved through the undergrowth, it passed a group of langurs perched on tree branches. The monkeys let out loud warning calls, their screeches piercing the air as they signaled the presence of a predator. The tiger ignored them, its focus entirely on the task at hand. Further ahead, the tiger encountered a lone wild dog, its yellow eyes gleaming in the dim light. The dog snarled, its body tensed as it prepared to challenge the tiger for its perceived prey. But the tiger let out a low, guttural growl, a sound that rumbled through the jungle like distant thunder. The dog, recognizing the tiger's dominance, backed away slowly, its tail between its legs. The tiger continued undeterred. Hours passed, and the jungle began to transform. The first rays of dawn filtered through the canopy, casting golden light on the forest floor. The tiger was growing tired but showed no sign of stopping. It paused occasionally to listen, its ears swiveling like radar dishes. Finally, it caught the faint sound of human voices. The voices were distant and filled with desperation, echoing faintly through the trees. John and Lena had been calling out for hours, their voices breaking from exhaustion. They had searched tirelessly, their hearts heavy with the fear of losing their child. Lena stumbled on a tree root and fell, sobbing into her hands as John helped her up. "We'll find him," he said, though his voice trembled with uncertainty. They had almost lost hope when John thought he heard something, a faint rustling in the distance. He froze, straining his ears. The tiger, too, heard the voices growing louder. It picked up its pace, navigating around thick roots and fallen branches. It approached cautiously, the baby still secure in its mouth. Finally, it emerged into a clearing where John and Lena stood. The sight was surreal, a tiger carrying a human baby. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. John and Lena froze, their eyes wide with terror. Lena instinctively moved behind John, clutching his arm. "Oh my God," she whispered. The tiger lowered the baby gently onto the ground, its golden eyes meeting John's. There was no aggression in its gaze, only an unreadable depth that seemed almost human. Lena gasped as she recognized the blanket. "It's him!" she cried, breaking free from John's grasp and running towards the baby. The tiger stood its ground, watching as she scooped the child into her arms. Tears streamed down her face as she hugged her baby tightly, her body shaking with relief. John joined her, his own eyes wet with emotion. The tiger watched the reunion in silence. It had done what no one would have believed possible, acting not as a predator, but as a guardian. After a moment it turned and walked back into the jungle, its striped form disappearing into the shadows. John and Lena stared after it, their hearts filled with gratitude and disbelief. They would never forget the tiger's act of compassion, a moment that defied every law of nature and left them questioning the boundaries between humans and animals. For them, the tiger was no longer a predator. It was a savior, a symbol of hope in the darkest of times. As the tiger disappeared into the shadows of the dense jungle, John and Lena stood frozen, holding their baby tightly. Their breaths came in shallow gasps, overwhelmed by the miracle they had just witnessed. The early morning light now filtered gently through the trees, illuminating the clearing where the impossible had unfolded. Lena held her baby close, her tears mingling with the soil on her cheeks as she whispered prayers of gratitude. John, though shaken, looked in the direction the tiger had gone. His heart pounded not with fear but with awe. "How is this even real?" he muttered, his voice breaking. The sight of the tiger, a creature they had always associated with danger, saving their child, was something that would forever remain etched in his mind. But as reality began to settle in, so did the practical concerns. The couple needed to leave the jungle and return to safety, but their legs felt like lead and their minds swirled with 1,000 thoughts. The baby, still wrapped in the same blanket, gurgled softly, seemingly unharmed. Lena kissed the top of the baby's head, marveling at the little miracle who had somehow survived what should have been an unthinkable ordeal. The couple began their journey back, retracing their steps with extreme caution. Every rustle of leaves made them jump, every shadow seemed to hide a lurking predator. But their determination to get their child to safety outweighed their fear. They whispered to each other, recounting the events over and over, as though saying it aloud might make it feel real. "What do you think made it do that?" Lena asked, her voice barely audible. John shook his head, his brows furrowed. "I don't know. Maybe it sensed the baby wasn't a threat. Or maybe—" He trailed off, unable to articulate the inexplicable. Hours passed as they navigated the labyrinth of the jungle, their bond as a family now stronger than ever. Occasionally, Lena would glance over her shoulder, half expecting to see the tiger following them, ensuring their safe passage. But the tiger was gone, as though it had melted back into the fabric of the jungle, its task completed. When they finally emerged from the dense foliage onto a familiar trail, the relief was palpable. Lena almost collapsed, but John steadied her, his grip firm and reassuring. They quickened their pace, the edges of their fear beginning to fray as the familiarity of civilization came into view. Back at their home, the story spread quickly. Friends and neighbors gathered to hear about the incredible encounter, but as expected, skepticism was widespread. "A tiger? Returning a baby? That's impossible," one neighbor scoffed. Others suggested that stress and fear might have caused the couple to misinterpret what they had seen. Yet no amount of doubt could diminish the truth of what John and Lena had experienced. For them, it didn't matter whether others believed it. The memory of that tiger, the way it had cradled their child so delicately, the intelligence in its eyes, was a testament to the extraordinary connection between humans and the natural world. In the days that followed, John and Lena found themselves changed. They became advocates for wildlife conservation, donating to organizations that work to protect tigers and their habitats. The story of their encounter became a bedtime tale for their child as he grew older, a lesson in kindness, respect, and the mysteries of the natural world. The tiger, meanwhile, returned to its solitary life in the jungle. But something in its demeanor had changed too. It no longer hunted near human settlements, as though recognizing the fragile boundary between its world and theirs. Other animals seemed to sense this change, and the tiger's presence became a silent guardian of the jungle. For John, Lena, and their child, the tiger was not just a memory, it was a symbol of hope and a reminder that miracles can happen in the most unexpected ways. As John and Lena adjusted to life after their miraculous encounter, their baby continued to grow, blissfully unaware of the extraordinary events that had surrounded him in the first weeks of his life. Though their lives had returned to a semblance of normalcy, the memory of that fateful day remained vivid in their minds, influencing everything they did. Lena found herself drawn to the idea of learning more about tigers and wildlife. She began spending her evenings reading about animal behavior, marveling at how nature could be both brutal and compassionate. John, too, found his perspective shifting. Where he once viewed wild animals as threats, he now saw them as vital parts of a larger ecosystem, each with its own purpose and intelligence. Despite their attempts to move on, the story of their encounter began to take on a life of its own. It started as whispers among their neighbors, but quickly spread to surrounding communities. Journalists reached out, intrigued by the tale of a tiger saving a human baby. At first, John and Lena were hesitant to speak publicly, worried that people would ridicule them, but after some thought they decided to share their story, not for fame, but to shed light on the remarkable bond that had been formed between predator and prey. Their story went viral. Articles appeared online with headlines like, "Tiger saves human baby, a true jungle miracle," and "Nature's compassion, the day a tiger became a hero." Wildlife organizations reached out to John and Lena, thanking them for sharing a story that showcased the intelligence and empathy of animals often feared and misunderstood. As the child grew older, he became fascinated with tigers. John and Lena would often recount the story of how he was saved by one, weaving it into bedtime tales. They named the tiger Guardian in their stories, giving the silent hero an identity that their child could relate to. Years later, the boy, now a young man, decided to dedicate his life to wildlife conservation. Inspired by the tiger that had saved him, he studied biology and animal behavior, becoming a renowned wildlife photographer and conservationist. His photographs captured the beauty of creatures in their natural habitats, raising awareness about the importance of preserving these ecosystems. But he didn't stop there. He felt a deep connection to the tiger that had saved him, and that connection fueled his desire to give back. He founded an organization named Guardian's Hope, which focused on protecting tigers and their habitats. The organization worked to combat poaching, educate communities about coexistence, and preserve forests where tigers roamed free. One of the most impactful projects of Guardian's Hope was a book the boy wrote, titled "Saved by a Tiger, A Journey of Survival and Gratitude." In it, he recounted the story of his miraculous rescue, weaving in the broader message of compassion between species and the need to protect endangered wildlife. The book became a bestseller, touching hearts around the world and sparking renewed interest in tiger conservation. The tiger, meanwhile, had become a legend in its own right. Though it remained hidden in the depths of the jungle, sightings of a lone tiger with an unusually calm demeanor were occasionally reported. Locals began to regard it as a sacred guardian of the forest, a symbol of balance and harmony in the wild. In the end, the tiger's actions not only saved a life, but also sparked a ripple effect of awareness and change. John and Lena's family became a beacon of hope, proving that even in the face of the most terrifying circumstances, kindness and connection could prevail. And the boy, now a man, carried the legacy of his miraculous encounter forward, ensuring that the tiger's act of compassion would never be forgotten.